Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be telling the story of Jason and the Argonauts. We spoke about the epic Argonautica back in episode 3, and also about Orpheus, the epic poet, and the first part of episode 4, where we read the story Orpheus and Eurydice. Argonautica was written by Apollonius of Rhodes in the 3rd century BC. Apollonius was the head librarian of Alexandria. He wrote at a time when the Greek-speaking world had been expanding through the conquests of Alexander the Great, and at a time when the democratic Greek polis had declined. Instead, we have the establishment of monarchical states. In fact, this is the story about the Greek conquests of lands near the Black Sea, where Colchis was, the place where from the sun rises from Oceanus, the edge of the world to the Greek eyes back then. This is a journey from Greece, up through a Hellespont, into the Black Sea, and all the way to the foot of the Caucasus mountain. Well, the truth is that this story dates back many hundreds of years ago. It's even older than the Odyssey itself. Its protagonist is Jason, a prince who lived in the land of Iolcus, a beautiful seaside town, what is Volos in today's Greece. He was the son of Aeson, the rightful king of Iolcus. Before Jason was born, his uncle Peleus, son of Poseidon, took the throne from Aeson, the rightful king, to the throne. In order to protect him from the wrath of his uncle, Aeson, the ex-king, sent his baby son to the nearby Mount Pelion. There Jason was raised by the centaur Chiron. Chiron was half man, half horse. He was the first physician who taught Jason the art of medicine. I guess that's why Jason's name is Iasonas, which in Greek comes from the word iaume, iasome in the future tense, which means a healer. Chiron the centaur also taught him the arts of rhetoric, warfare, and intrigue. Chiron was the teacher of other great heroes, if you remember, such as Achilles and Theseus. So the story we're going to read starts at the palace of Iolcus, where Peleus is sitting on his throne, biting his nails, living with the fear of Apollo's oracle at Delphi. He has been told that he was fated to be killed by a one-sandaled man. At this point, Jason has just reached the palace of Iolcus in order to face his uncle. He's just climbed down the mountain, Pelion, and lost his sandal trying to help an old woman cross a river, who happened to be whom? Hera the goddess, who had been testing the young hero. As soon as he saw the one-sandaled man, Peleus' eyes popped out of his royal sockets, and he's now challenging Jason. Peleus is afraid to kill Jason outright, so he's challenging him to answer the question himself. What would you do if a man was destined to kill you? Jason responds, saying he would ask that man to retrieve, or better still if you prefer, the legendary Golden Fleece from Colchis at the far edge of the world. Peleus couldn't be a happier, fully sandaled man. So, with the help of Athena, Jason invited Argus to build a ship called Argo, with one beam from the sacred oak of Dodona. The beam could speak and at some points give advice to the crew. A talking ship, that is. It's getting better, trust me. What's more, a series of heroes joined the crew. Orpheus, the great epic poet and magician, the Dioscuri, sons of Zeus, Castor and Polydeuces, Castor and Polydeuces, also known as Pollux, Telamon, father of the great Ajax, Peleus, father of Achilles, and Argus, the builder of the Argo, not the electrical suppliers. Though a few flying chairs, lava lamps, even drones will help them through the clashing rocks and the sirens, don't you think? However, the story we're going to be reading is a classical story. Here we have a superhero, maybe boringly super duper, who throwing shapes and all, who he cares about is the Golden Fleece. could sometimes be a pain in the butt, I can tell you. And we also have the Princess Medea, a wise witch, was eventually brought to the sheep to Argo by Jason and the Argonauts alongside the Golden Fleece. Like a sort of sheep, you know. No wonder the Greco-Roman world was pretty scared of dynamic women like Medea or Circe, demonizing them. But listen to this one. According to another myth, another version of the myth, Jason was very much loved by his people. He had more human than superheroic characteristics like Achilles or Hercules, for example. He was more like a lad, a dude, who was lucky to have so many super forces coming to his aid. Comfy zone, isn't it? Maybe good karma? Who knows? So because the drought was ravaging the Iolcus, causing famine and disease, Jason and his men set off on this journey to far-off Colchis, the place where the sun sets and rises to the Greek eyes. He sailed there to get the Golden Fleece, a ram's fleece of pure gold, guided by two fierce, fire-breathing, bronze-hoofed bulls known as Chalkotavri, copper bulls, also by a dragon. I won't tell you what happened next. Last but not least, want to hear an interesting story? Did you know that there is another story within the story here in the Argonautica? Well, Orpheus, the epic poet, we spoke about him in episode 4a. He accompanied Jason and the Argonauts on this long and perilous sea journey to Colchis. Orpheus was singing them stories about how the universe came into being, about the creation of the earth and its roaring rivers and mountains, about the Titans and about the gods. And then the Argonauts were left breathless with wonder, holding on to their oars and summoning more strength to continue their journey fraught with unspeakable dangers. Eager to hear more about the mysteries of the universe from the lips of Orpheus, who with his music was trying to appease the strife, the roaring elements, to appease the strife of the gods and the strife of men, and give way back to harmony. The writer of the Argonautica here refers to the cosmic forces of attraction and repulsion, according to the pre-Socratic philosopher Empedocles. And shall I tell you another secret? All of these men and women on the Argo are solar heroes, heading for the land of the Ram, the land of the sun. So let's spin once more the yarn together and read part of the classical story, Jason and the Argonauts. Challenge it. Look for more versions, look for more nuances and more interpretations. Meanwhile, Orpheus will be singing for us in our mind's eyes about the beginning, the Archin, about how the world came into being out of chaos, out of void, a story we will be also discussing in the next few episodes on Greek mythos, cosmology, and philosophy. Enjoy! Jason and the Golden Fleece. When a tall stranger turned up at the palace, King Peleus felt uneasy. Not only did the young man look surprisingly familiar, but he marched right up to the throne as if he owned it. Yet it was something else that really bothered the king. "Why are you only wearing one sandal? Where's the other one?" he asked suspiciously before the stranger had time to say a word. The stranger looked down at his bare foot. "I lost it giving an old woman a lift across the river," he answered. Peleus shifted uncomfortably on his throne. Many years before, the goddess Hera had warned him that his downfall would come from a man who had lost a sandal in exactly this way. It had seemed ridiculous at the time, but now he was worried. "Anyway, to come straight to the point," said the stranger, "I'm your nephew, Jason. I've come to claim my rightful place as king." A wave of shock rippled across the court. "Whatever do you mean?" spluttered the king. "For a start, I don't have a nephew." "Allow me to explain," Jason said. "When you stole the throne from my father, he was already old and frail, so he didn't dare challenge you. Then I was born. He feared for my life, knowing you to be a ruthless man, so he smugged me away to be brought up in hiding." People began to eye the king suspiciously. "Anyway, now I'm old enough," Jason continued, "and my father is dead. I've come to claim my kingdom." Beads of sweat appeared on Peleus' forehead. It was going to be hard to get out of this one. The boy was the image of his father, and everything he said was true. He stared at his nephew in silence, racking his brains for a solution. Finally, he spoke up. "I wouldn't want to entrust the kingdom to someone with no experience," he said slowly. "If you're worthy of ruling, I presume you'll have no objection to proving it." "None at all," said Jason. "Then bring me the famous Golden Fleece from the kingdom of Colchis," the king said, "and I'll gladly give up the throne." "Very well," Jason agreed. "I will." Peleus sank back in relief as he watched his nephew leave. Colchis was far away across the sea, and any voyage there would be dangerous and difficult. Even if Jason managed to get there, the Golden Fleece would not be easy to win. The king did not expect Jason to return. Jason began to prepare for the journey immediately. He went to the best shipbuilder he could find and asked him to build a sturdy ship that would sail as fast as the wind. Then he set about gathering a crew. He found ready support for his cause. Many older men remembered his father, and those who didn't warmed to Jason's straightforward, energetic nature. News of his quest spread quickly. By the time the ship was ready, Jason had a crew of 50 of the bravest men and women in the land. Jason named his ship the Argo, which means swift. His crew became known as the Argonauts, and they were a lively bunch. One of them was Orpheus, whose beautiful music could whip up a sailing wind or calm the seas. Zets and Calais, the winged twin sons of the North Wind, and Atalanta, a fearless female warrior who had been brought up by bears, joined them. They sailed for many months on rough seas and on smooth, through fierce storms and under the glare of the beating sun. When all their food was gone, they managed to leave off whatever fish they could catch in the sea. Then, at last, a small island appeared on the horizon. "Let's stop there and stock up on supplies," said Jason. They drew into the rocky bay, and a large palace came into view. Jason decided at once to investigate. Zets and Calais, winged twins, went with him. As they walked, a terrible stench filled the air. It became more and more unbearable the closer they got to the palace. Baring their noses and their cloaks, they pressed on. Close up, the palace looked empty and neglected. There were holes in the roof, and some feeble attempts had been made to cover some of the windows with wooden boards. But they were all split and broken. Cautiously, Jason and the twins pushed open a heavy door that was hanging off its hinges and went inside. Sitting along at a long table strewn with the rotten, stinking remains of a meal was a thin old man.
He looked up as they approached, but his eyes were white and blind. "Who is there?" he asked in a wavering voice. "A friend," Jason replied gently. "Oh, Jason," said the man, "I was hoping you'd be here soon." "How do you know who I am?" Jason asked, stunned. "I may be blind," the man replied, "but I have other ways of seeing. My name is Phineas." "I've heard of you. People say you can see into the future," Jason said. "If that's true, please, could you tell me whether I will win the Golden Fleece?" Phineas shook his head. "Look at the mess I'm in," he said. "The gods hated me telling people what will happen. They blinded me as punishment and sent harpies to torment me." Harpies were foul creatures. Their name means snatchers, and they were known for snatching things or even people and carrying them away. Jason was about to ask what a harpy was when a servant came in carrying a plate piled high with bread and olives, figs and apricots. He laid it down on the table and scurried back out of the room. Immediately, the sound of beating wings filled the air, and 3 revolting vulture-like creatures burst in through the windows. Jason caught a glimpse of their leering human faces as they seized some of the food and their filthy claws and flew back outside. The stench they left behind turned his stomach, and all the food left on Phineas' plate was seeping and rotten. Phineas sighed. "I haven't had a decent meal in months. What a pathetic king I am. Nobody can bear to live here. I've only one servant left. I've paid him everything I own to stay with me." The servant poked his head around the door. "Shall I try again?" he asked. Phineas nodded. "Sometimes you can get a quick mouthful," he explained to Jason, "before they come." The servant hurried back with another plate of food. The harpies circled outside, cackling viciously. Jason stepped forward. "Eat Phineas," he urged, his hand on his sword. "I'll kill them if they come near." "You won't catch them," Phineas said, but he reached for a piece of bread nonetheless. The harpies dived into the room again. Claws outstretched. Jason drove them off, but they dodged his blade and gathered to drive again. In one fluid motion, Zetz and Calais spread their wings and took to the air with their swords drawn. The harpies veered away in and out of the window, screeching in surprise. They were speedy, but their twins, the twins were as swift as the wind. The brothers gave chase, and soon they had all disappeared from view. Phineas ate hungrily. "Your friends will be back soon," he said between mouthfuls. "Meanwhile, in return for your kindness, I will tell you something you need to know. There's danger ahead. Your route is about to take you through the clashing rocks. Every ship that has ever tried to sail through them has been smashed to smithereens. But if you do what I tell you, you'll have a slim chance of making it." By the time the twins had returned, Phineas had finished his first meal in months, and Jason was sitting beside him holding a caged dove on his knee. "We caught them," panted Zetz, sheathing his sword with flourish. "They'll never bother you again." Phineas smiled. "May the gods reward your kindness with a safe journey," he said. With the old man's blessing and plenty of fresh provisions, Jason and the twins returned to the rest of the crew and they set sail once more. Before long, they came to a narrow channel of water, enclosed on both sides by towering cliffs. The only way forward was to sail right through the middle. When the sheep drew close to the opening, Jason said, "Hold it here!" Then he released the dove into the air. Phineas said that if this dove makes it through the rocks alive, we have a chance of doing the same. Get ready to follow it when I give the word. Everybody watched as the bird flew between the rocks. There was a shudder and a groan, and to their horror, the cliffs on either side started to move. Like two massive fists, they started to come together, churning the sea up into foam. The shadows swallowed up the bird's tiny form. They got closer and closer until they collided with a thundering crash that almost split the sky in two. Then the cliffs began to move apart again, and the two white feathers fluttered down and onto the water. The crew's heart sank. Then they caught sight of the dove flying beyond the rocks. It had made it through alive. "Now," yelled Jason, "roll like you've never rolled before. Our lives depend on it." Everybody began straining at the oars, and the sheep surged into the narrow passage. The rocks continued to move slowly apart until they had returned to their original position. But before the sheep was even halfway through, they started lurching closer together again. Huge waves crashed over the deck, drenching everybody to the skin. Gasping for air, they kept on rowing. The rocks moved ever closer, casting bone-chilling shadows across the deck. At any minute, the crew would be crushed to death. "Keep going!" cried Jason, heaving at the oars. The sheep was just squeezing out of the other side when the rocks closed in on its stern. The wood began to splinter as they squeezed tighter and tighter, and the crew strained at the oars with all their might. Then with a grinding crunch, the sheep burst free. Just as the rocks crashed together, only the very tip of the stern was lost. The rocks drew slowly back, and the crew dropped their oars and sank onto the deck, exhausted. When they'd recovered their strength, they sailed on to Colchis. The sun was beginning to glow red over the sea when they finally put down anchor in the bustling port and made their way to the palace. Jason asked to see the king. "I've come to claim the Golden Fleece," he told him. The king frowned.
Young fools always come here thinking they can win my golden fleece. My golden fleece, he said, and every one of them dies trying. It's guarded by a dragon that never sleeps. I'll fight the dragon, said Jason, and deterred. Before you get to the dragon, you must complete 2 tasks, the king said grudgingly. Young woman with jet black hair and glittering green eyes put her hand on the king's arm. Father, it's late, she said, in a voice as smooth as honey. Why don't we wait until tomorrow? There will be more people here than to witness this young fool's defeat. The king nodded, looking pleased with the idea. I'll show you to a room where you can rest, said the woman, and she led Jason and his crew out of the hall. I can help you, she whispered when they were out of earshot. The tasks are impossible without my magic. Jason was completely taken aback. Why would you help me win something from your own father? He asked. She fixed him with a bewitching stare and said, because you're the man I want to marry. Jason's skin tingled under her gaze. I don't even know your name, he said. Medea, the woman answered. She took Jason's hand and led him to her room. There she prepared a magic ointment made from all kinds of strange ingredients and gave it to him in a little jar. Rub this on your skin, she said. It will protect you, but beware, you'll still need all your strength and wits to survive. In the morning, Jason and his crew were taken to a field outside the palace, where a crowd had gathered to watch. The first task, announced the king, is to put a yoke on these bulls and drive them across this field. It sounded simple enough, but as Jason approached the 2 hulking creatures, flames came streaming from their nostrils. These were clearly no ordinary bulls. Jason kept on edging towards them, and the crowd gasped as he was engulfed in the fire. But Medea's potion was so powerful that, whereas anyone else would have been burned to cinders, Jason was only slightly singed. Jason was filled with relief. The potion worked. He had nothing to fear. Confidently, he walked straight up to the bulls and took hold of their horns. After a few disgruntled snorts, the beasts calmed down. Jason harnessed the bulls and drove them up and down the field, as though they were ordinary farm animals. He had dug up half the field before the king growled, "That's enough!" He didn't look at all pleased. "Now climb this dragon's teeth," he said curtly, and handed Jason a pouch full of yellow, pointed teeth. Jason looked at them curiously, wondering what purpose planting dragon's teeth seeds could possibly serve. Then he shrugged and sprinkled them into the soil. Immediately, 4 identical, fully armed warriors sprang up from the ground. They advanced on him murderously, fresh soil falling from their limbs. Jason drew his sword, and his crew sprang forward to defend him. But the king held up his hand. He has to fight them by himself, or else he forfeits the Golden Fleece, he warned. Reluctantly, they fell back. As Jason clashed swords with the warriors, another two sprouted from the soil and attacked him from behind. He dodged blows from the first four and whirled around to fight the second pair. Another warrior emerged and joined the battle, and then another and another. Until Jason could bravely be seen through the forest of slashing swords. Jason fought fast and furiously, but nothing seemed to stop the soil-grown army. When he lopped an arm off one warrior, it simply picked up the sword in its other hand and kept on fighting doggedly as if nothing had happened. To gain a few seconds breathing space, he thrust a couple of warriors away from him. They toppled into the warriors behind, knocking them over. Exhausted, Jason raised his sword again as they got to their feet. But instead of attacking him, the fallen warriors turned on the ones that had knocked them over. Suddenly, Jason realized what he must do. He picked up a rock and hurled it into the midst of another group of warriors. It sent them into confusion. It sent them into great confusion. They all looked around to see which one of them had thrown the rock, and then set upon one another with their swords. It works, Jason exclaimed. He threw another rock into a different band of warriors who turned on one another too. Soon they were all fighting among themselves and seemed to have forgotten all about him. The king was furious. "Enough!" he shouted, but the warriors paid no attention. They kept on hacking away at one another, lopping off heads and chopping off limbs, until they had nothing left to hold their swords with. Only then did they fall to the ground, defeated. "Shall I fight the dragon next?" Jason asked, his spirit entirely undampened. The king glared at him. "That can wait until tomorrow," he snapped. "I'll have some food and wine brought to your rooms." Then he turned his back and walked away. That evening, Jason and his crew were just about to start drinking the wine when Medea rushed in. "Don't drink that," she cried, wrenching the jug from the indignant sailor's hand. "It's got enough sleeping powder in it to knock out an entire army. My father doesn't want to give up his precious golden fleece," she explained. "He told me he's going to have you all murdered in your sleep tonight. You must escape at once." "I'm not living without the fleece," Jason told her. "Then we'll have to get it now," Medea answered. Jason took the jug of drugged wine from her hand and a bowl from the table, and they followed Medea out of the palace. She took them to a grove of trees, where draped over a branch of an oak tree was the Golden Fleece. It truly lived up to its name. It gleamed bright gold, even in the dead of night. Curled around the trunk of the tree lay a fearsome dragon. Its skin looked like green metal, and each of his jet black talons were as long as a man's forearm. Its watchful eyes glittered dangerously as Jason and Medea approached. Jason poured the dragged wine into the bowl he'd brought from the room and began to push it slowly closer to the beast. "This may help you sleep," he whispered. The creature watched him without blinking. Before Jason got anywhere near, it raised its head and blasted a huge stream of flame at him. Despite Medea's magic lotion, Jason winced with pain as the fire scorched his skin. Just then, he heard a low rhythmic murmur behind him. As the ball shifted, he watched in fascination as it moved out of his hands and slid all by itself along the ground to the dragon. Jason glanced back at Medea. She was staring concentratedly at the ball, her lips mouthing some kind of spell. When it reached the dragon's feet, the ball stopped. The beast sniffed it suspiciously, then dipped its nose inside and lapped up a little wine. Steam hissed from the sides of his mouth as the liquid quenched the fire in the creature's throat. It drank deeply until all the wine was gone. Almost immediately, its eyelids began to droop. It shook its head, looking confused, and stared around hazily. Slowly its head sank lower and lower until at last it laid on the ground and closed its yellow eyes. Quietly, Jason got to his feet and crept towards the tree. He was just reaching over the dragon's head to lift the fleece from the branch when the beast shifted. Jason froze, his hand on the hilt of his sword, but the dragon just gave a heavy sigh and then began to snore. Jason reached up again and slid the fleece carefully off the branch. Then he crept back to his waiting friends, and they all hurried down to the ship. They set sail at once, taking Medea and the Golden Fleece with them. The wind was on their side, and they sped across the ink-dark waves. By the time the king's soldiers came with glinting swords to the beds, Jason and his crew were long gone. When Jason returned home and presented King Peleus with a golden fleece, the king couldn't help but let out a groan. Now there was absolutely no denying Jason's right to the throne.